Hey everyone, you've all seen me mock Eric Weinstein before, especially in a recent video about his encounter with Sean Carroll. But an opportunity arose that will allow me to follow that thread to its full conclusion and mock him even more in the process. Have I piqued your interest? Good, let's get started. Stop me if you've heard this one. Eric Weinstein walks into a bar. No? You haven't heard it? Well, that's great, because you're gonna love it. But also, it would be weird if you had heard it before, because nobody has. Less of a joke and more of a story, this video is going to be about a late-night alcohol-infused interaction that physicist Christian Ferko had with Eric Weinstein back in May of this year. He emailed me to tell me about it, and we agreed that it needed to be shared with the world, since it sheds some light on who Eric is as a person and how he is perceived by the physics community. Then, to ensure that this information does not go to waste, we will apply it to some of the things he said while being scolded by Sean Carroll on Piers Morgan. Eric made several highly specific claims about what's in geometric unity, and Christian is going to go through those claims to show with complete clarity that Eric is a liar, and GU is nothing but smoke and mirrors for tricking the science-illiterate public into thinking that he's a genius. But first, let's set the stage a little bit. That brutal interaction on Piers Morgan from late May was seen by almost 1 million people, and my commentary on the interaction was also seen by almost 1 million people. Eric was very much the laughingstock of the internet that week, and he needed to come up with some damage control as quickly as possible. But who is going to help him run the spin cycle? Everyone knows GU is nothing, so who can help Eric continue to pretend that it's something? He really has only two options here. The first is Kurt Jaimungal. Kurt already did a 3-hour-long video doing his best to make GU seem like a real theory, almost certainly on Eric's dollar, but after the humiliation Sean served him, it was time for more drastic measures. Kurt put out another 3-hour video, this time interviewing Eric.
Why are you nervous?
You're formidable. Sean Carroll doesn't make me as nervous as you do, and he's hostile and you're not.
That's right, Kurt is about to lick Eric's balls for longer than the runtime of any Lord of the Rings extended edition, and not a physicist Kurt is way smarter and cooler than stupid real physicist Sean. So disregard the Piers video entirely. This puff piece is where it's really at. Oh yeah, and Sean is super hostile, because he sat there quietly and politely while Eric spewed his bullshit script, and once it was his turn to speak, he calmly informed the viewers that Eric is a con man propping up a fake paper and pretending it's a revolutionary theory of everything. But don't worry, Kurt isn't hostile at all. He's just there for the ball licking and the artificial inflation of Eric's persecution complex. What do you think Kurt's netting here? 10 grand? 20? Eric is loaded and desperate, so I bet Kurt made out pretty well on this one.
You've arrived. I'm nervous for the right reasons, because we're actually going to have a conversation, and I never have a conversation.
Eric, literally all you do is have conversations. Your only job, your entire purpose in life, is to go on podcasts and have never-ending conversations with whoever will listen to your bloated bloviations, where you pretend to be the world's leading expert on literally every topic. That you got called out by Sean for not being able to write a real paper, and your response is to just have another 3-hour-long conversation on YouTube doing nothing but whining about how physics is lost and nobody will take you seriously, is quite telling. We're not going to dissect either of these marathon-length videos, since it would serve very little purpose, and ain't nobody got time for that. But check out Eric's next move. Remember when I said Eric had not one but two buddies that could help him out? The second is Brian Keating, of course. I pointed out in my Weinstein Brothers video that Brian is a complete joke who constantly platforms Eric, Discovery Institute clowns, and engages in other questionable behavior. Well, he's only gotten even more pointless since then, so here he comes to white knight for Eric for the 1000th time.
After the noise died down, I sat down with Eric for a conversation about all of this. His theory of geometric unity. What does it all mean? And why do so many people misunderstand or misrepresent what it's all about?
Wow, Brian finally gets to the bottom of GU, because it's not like he's platformed Eric a zillion times over the past several years or anything. I guess they hadn't dug into it yet, since there's nothing to actually talk about. And spoiler alert, they don't do that here either. It's just 2.5 hours of shit talking. And of course, why does everyone misrepresent poor Eric's awesome theory? Why is Eric always the victim of big bad academia? This is pathetic and absolutely not worth listening to, except for one tidbit.
I don't sense with either you or myself any desire to just negate people. If somebody is just determined to be horrible,
Yeah.
I don't mind commenting. That person seems to want to be horrible. Dave Farina, perfect example. But if he did something genius or something really brilliant, I would like to think that we would say, hey, this is kind of uncomfortable, but this person actually really did something impressive.
Yeah.
Aw, it sounds like I've been getting under Eric's skin. He doesn't sense that he has the desire to negate people, even though that's literally all he does for a living, is try and negate the entire academic establishment and brainwash the masses into rejecting credentialed experts altogether. Eric, you're the biggest negator on the fucking internet. I'm the one who defends the scientific community against bullying frauds like you, remember? This is what you deserve, and I'll never stop doing it. Call me horrible. Run and cry to mommy about how mean I am. It won't change a fucking thing. Oh, and if I had done something brilliant, you'd acknowledge it? Like how you want everyone to acknowledge geometric unity as a revolutionary, paradigm-shifting masterpiece, even though you're really just a pointless professional troll? Let's get one thing real clear, Eric. I've done more for science than you have. Have I published any research? No, and neither have you. We are not scientists. We are a pair of non-scientists who have published the same zero amount of science. But while you're a podcaster who spreads science denial, I support the scientific community and teach science concepts to budding future scientists. Now that I'm 10 years in, I have helped many thousands of people become scientists, who in turn do lots of science. Who have you helped? Have you helped anyone pass a class or get a job? Of course not. You tear science down. I build it up. You are the dark. I am the light. You get paid by oligarchs to poison society. I root for humanity, reflect your negativity back onto you, and neutralize your awfulness. You can't acknowledge that because you need for me to be a villain in your tale of persecution. But fewer and fewer people are falling for that story every day. You're nearly extinct, and this little jab is born of pure panic, after being repeatedly knocked down from your high horse by yours truly. Never fucking forget it. Alright, with all the lead up covered, we arrive at the main event. All we need in order to set up this story from Christian is one thing that Eric said on Piers Morgan. Check this out.
But I happened to be on a 5-day visit to a leading physics department. And in this situation, I just had a 9-hour conversation and talk, with 3 hours or 4 hours rather of that being an explication of geometric unity.
Yes, Eric claimed to be visiting a top physics institution to graciously lecture his intellectual inferiors for 9 hours, a good chunk of which was about GU. As you'll recall, I was quite skeptical that any legitimate institution would have Eric around for any reason. As it turns out, I was wrong. This is why Christian initially got in touch with me. Eric was referring to the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics in Canada, which is a real place, and Eric was indeed invited to speak there. Christian knows this because he was also there to give a pair of talks, one of which was right before Eric's. Here's the thing, Perimeter did not record Eric's seminar, mention it on their website, take photos, or publicize it in any way, and even forbade Eric from mentioning them by name, or you know he would have name-dropped them on Piers in a heartbeat. So you see, it's actually quite hilarious. Eric was invited to speak at Perimeter on the condition that he not tell anyone that he was there. This is because they hoped to squeeze some money out of him without sacrificing their reputation by publicly affiliating themselves with a charlatan. Eric gets to feel like a real physicist for a day, and they hopefully get a pile of cash in return. It's like a Make-A-Wish Foundation sort of experience for Eric, but paid for out of his own $100 million net worth pockets instead of through donations to sick children. Apologies to Perimeter for spilling the beans. It's nothing personal. I'm just here to take out the trash. Continuing, Christian bumped into an inebriated Eric late at night, and the conversation that ensued was bizarre. Christian believes the details of that conversation would be of interest to you guys, and I wholeheartedly agree. So rather than attempting to paraphrase, I'll just let Christian tell you about it himself. Hey, Christian, thanks so much for joining us. I think everyone is really excited to hear this story. We have all of the context, so I kind of want to just hand it over to you and regale us.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Dave. So just to set the scene a little bit, if if people have been to Perimeter, so you walk into the building and there's this enormous atrium type area where they have the Black Hole Bistro. So it's kind of an open seating area, and I was sitting there around 1 a.m., so it was quite late. When I visit places like this, I tend to get into long physics discussions. So I'm talking about cosmology or something like that with a colleague. And lo and behold, walking through this long hallway into the atrium comes kind of staggering a little bit, Eric Weinstein, who I had been assiduously avoiding because I didn't really want to interact with him at all while I was there on this visit. And he comes and sits down, much to my horror, and starts to ask what we're working on. So I tried to give a very curt response. So I said, well, I gave one talk on this, one talk on this, not really giving him much to latch onto. And it seemed like it had worked because he got kind of bored and started stumbling away. And unfortunately, my colleague then wanted to stir up some trouble, so he shouted, "No, Eric, come back. Christian works on string theory." And yeah,
The
that was
magic
that.
words.
Yes, that was the beginning of the end. So then he came back and asked, "Okay, well, what do you think of string theory?" And I told him what I tell a lot of people when this topic comes up, which is that I think string theory isn't what we thought it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and a lot of the public criticism of string theory is kind of unfounded because string theory is more of a tool like calculus that you use for building theories. It's not a single theory in and of itself. And I thought Eric would kind of push back because I had heard a lot of his public comments about this. But surprisingly, he said, I completely agree with you. That has been my position for decades. And they killed a lot of my friends for saying this. And first of all, I don't really know what that means. I assume he's talking about ending people's careers or something like this. But it seemed to me a little bit like this ingratiating tactic that he uses. If you remember from the Piers interview, at some point he says, Sean, we could work together in the same notation. We know the same people, as if to sort of foster some camaraderie.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, what he was doing with this trick. But it didn't really make a lot of sense to me because that's completely at odds with what he had been
His
saying.
entire public persona, all of his videos, the thumbnails are always, string theory is destroying physics and all this crap. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. So maybe privately he does respect string theory as an intellectual enterprise. I'm not completely sure.
Yeah.
But that's where he started launching into this rant, and it got kind of, way, way off the rails. So maybe one anecdote that I'll tell you, because I think it was one piece of this that was especially funny, is he started talking about Ken Wilson, who's some people in your audience might know is a Nobel Prize winning physicist who had worked on something called the renormalization group and understanding phase transitions. So he whipped out his phone and said, Ken Wilson is a drug that should require a prescription. And I didn't really know what that meant. And then he starts playing a YouTube video from Wheel of Fortune. So he puts his phone on the table, plays this video, and stares at me expectantly. And I mean, I could send you the video if you like, but it's an example where there's only two characters on the board, an apostrophe and an L, I think. And the contestant on Wheel of Fortune just guesses the entire phrase, which is, I've got a good feeling about this, or something.
Hmm.
And he just stares at me expectantly. Like, I have no
Obviously,
idea
you
what
know
to
what
say.
I mean by this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of these. He uses a lot of these bizarre analogies, as you've probably seen in your coverage of him. But he stares at me, and I say, "Is this some analogy for guessing an ultraviolet theory from an infrared theory? Which in physics we use ultraviolet to mean high energies, not just for wavelengths of light, but more generally, and infrared to mean low energies." And he says, "Now you're getting it. Nobody wants to try to guess what the real theory is if they have someone like Ed Witten saying, you dumb fucking bitch, every time they guess wrong." And I only later realized that I think this is really a statement about geometric unity. He thinks that he has somehow guessed what the correct theory is from essentially no information, despite the fact that it's obviously and provably wrong. So he's envisioning himself as this contestant who's extremely lucky or smart or whatever, and has somehow guessed the phrase, but it's just completely misplaced. It's very
Also,
weird.
the victimization. I mean, does Ed Witten even know who Eric Weinstein is? Like, would he ever talk like that? Like, I don't know Ed Witten. I don't really know his reputation, but is he like that? Or
No, no. I mean, Ed is a very, very proper person. I mean, I don't know. I think,
he's incredibly soft-spoken. I've seen some footage of him speaking. He's like
yeah,
shockingly soft-spoken. Yeah.
yeah. I've interacted with him, and he's very polite and wouldn't say anything like this. But I mean, Eric has his entire mythology around Witten. I mean, he's referred to Ed as Voldemort in one of the Joe Rogan interviews. He claims, as I think you mentioned in one of your videos, Eric claims that the Seiberg-Witten equations, which are famous equations in mathematics and
Right.
physics,
That
that
they're
he
his.
actually discovered them, right?
Right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
insufficiently nonlinear
Yeah.
equations, he
It's
calls
in
them.
that lost notebook right next to the Sheob operator.
Yes, yeah, it's
Yeah.
he made that claim as well in our conversation, which I'm not a historian of science, and I don't work directly on the Seiberg-Witten equations, but from what I understand of the development of the field, it seems completely impossible to me that anyone besides Seiberg and Witten could have come up with the Seiberg-Witten equations at that time. So the claim is just, I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely
Especially someone
ridiculous.
who is not a physicist and has never done any physics ever.
Yes, yeah, he's a mathematician, and I don't know, maybe not, if I can say, maybe not a great one at that. I mean, one of my colleagues, when I was discussing Eric, said, you know, that guy really gives me hope because if that guy could get a PhD in math, surely I can, because he's essentially a clown.
It really, it's as a tangent here, it is perplexing to me how he even got one without publishing a dissertation, right? He essentially did no relevant work in the field and somehow got the degree anyway. I'm curious about that. I don't know if anybody knows more about that chapter, but yeah.
Yeah, this I've looked at his thesis. It seems like it's reasonable work, but as you say, there was no publication, which is kind of unusual. Just write a thesis with no papers. Evidently, he was able to get a postdoctoral position afterwards, maybe two, I forget, which is also surprising because he had no publications. And yeah, I can't really shed much light on it besides to say that from the perspective of someone in academia working in a related field, it's kind of bizarre.
Hmm.
So I don't know what the story is there. But yeah, so this claim of the Seiberg-Witten equations came up as well in the conversation, and I didn't push back for fear of getting into some sort of I don't know, flame war or something. But the Ed criticisms were flowing freely. So he does a very unflattering impression of Ed, which I'm not going to attempt to reproduce, but Ed has a famously high-pitched voice, and Eric claims, which I also find kind of strange, that in 1983 he attended a talk by Ed. I think he's also made this comment on Rogan, and he said that at that time Ed was insisting that three generations of fermions, which is a fact about the Standard Model, is obvious from thinking about Calabi-Yau manifolds, which are something that come up in string theory, but it's kind of historically strange because the paper that really launched this excitement about Calabi-Yaus didn't come until 1985. So I don't know if it's possible that what he says is correct, but I think this is another one of these weird historical anachronisms that he's kind of making up in order to, I don't know, tell some story about how Ed misled the entire field. And he specifically made the claim that three people, Ed, Lenny, and David, referring to Witten, Leonard Susskind, and David Gross, they killed our field. They ended physics. It's like the rape of Nanjing. He's sort of saying that what
The
these guys
historical
did,
references, man, they just kill me. Yeah.
he really likes these for some reason.
Well, it's all narrative. It's all narrative and no substance because if he was this brilliant physicist that he portrays himself as, he could just do physics, but he can't because he isn't. So it's all of these, the Wheel of Fortune thing and the Nanjing and the just story. It's just fabricated narrative because there's no substance behind any of it.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. So his opinion, or at least what he said at that time, was that if these three people were honest, so if Ed, Lenny, and David were good scientists, what they should do, according to him, and I quote, is to say, "Wow, we fucked up. We really fucked up," and go back to doing physics the way that we did, decades ago in the 60s, 70s or something, which I think is kind of flavored by the fact that that was the last time Eric was thinking about physics or math was, I guess, in the 80s or early 90s. And it really comes across in a lot of his opinions where he says things about physics that are just extremely outdated. He's focused on old-fashioned views of grand unification and things like that that are
Yeah.
from that time. And yeah, he's I don't know. I guess he thinks that what we really should do is go back to the good old days. Like he has rose-colored glasses about this.
But also, that confuses me. And look, I'm not a physicist and I'm not a historian of physics, but my understanding is we started coming up with quantum field theories. And then when was QED? Like the 50s or
Yeah,
something?
around there. Yeah,
QCD, 60s, I don't know, shortly thereafter. So if you extend that to its logical conclusion, you get a quantum field theory for every fundamental force. So trying to get quantum gravity via string theory or via another model is doing what we were doing prior to the 70s. So I don't even understand what he's talking about. You know what I mean? Like it seems like a very linear, it doesn't mean we're gonna get one, and it doesn't mean string theory is the one or whatever it is, but it's like it's a very logical continuation of the way physics was being done in like the 50s or whatever era he's talking about.
Yes, you're preaching to the choir. That
Yeah.
is my opinion, and it also seems strangely like what Eric is trying to do with his geometric unity. I mean, it claims to be something which is going to incorporate both quantum field theory and gravity. Obviously, it does not succeed in any sense whatsoever, but there's some strange contradiction that he says this, he works on something which he claims will be maybe some theory of quantum gravity, and then he makes comments like in his recent talk at UC San Diego. He starts by saying quantum gravity is a mental disease, that he thinks that somehow this entire field of people are I don't know, batty or like screwed up in the head or something like this. So it's all just it's extremely bizarre.
It's just a way for him to manufacture the like a mirage of him being intellectually superior to basically the entire field of physics, right? It's an artificial way of propping himself above actual experts in the field. That's pretty much it.
Yes, and that brings me to another interesting comment that he made. So he, of course, was at Perimeter apparently to speak about geometric unity, and quite reasonably there was pushback on his ideas. And he was recounting to me a conversation he had with Davide Gaiotto, who's a very serious good physicist, and pointed out an objection that many other people have pointed out, Joseph Conlin, Tim Nguyen, who you've had on, that the anomalies in this theory don't cancel. And that's a technical statement, but all you need to know is that that's completely fatal. If you don't have anomaly cancellation, the theory is done. It's not a small issue. It's just completely fatal. And at that point, Eric stares at me and says, "Is a whale a fish?" And I'm extremely confused. I said, "Well, okay. I normally think of a whale as a mammal and not a fish." And then he says, "Well, there's 3 levels of answer to this question." He says that the common person, the working man, the blue collar guy, would say a whale is a fish.
I get it. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, you probably see where this is going, but since you know about evolutionary biology.
Yeah, but the viewer, for the benefit of the viewer, yeah.
Yeah, just for completeness. So maybe a common person says a whale is a fish because it swims in water, and then there's a somehow next level where you say, no, a whale is a mammal, it's not quite a fish. And then there's this more sophisticated cladistic definition that evolutionary biologists use, which is technical, but according to that definition, all mammals are fish, and therefore a whale is a fish.
Yes,
and
tetrapods are all lobe-finned fish, sarcopterygians, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So then Eric says that the string theorists are like the second level. So we're the people who say, no, whales are mammals, they're not fish. And he's at the third level. And he claims that, string theorists can't appreciate that there's a level above them. They don't realize that Eric is on a separate plane of existence. He's much smarter than them. And,
Right.
They can't appreciate this.
And yet,
So-
unfortunately, simply cannot publish any science whatsoever describing this mythical third tier that only he inhabits.
Right, or even explain it to anyone.
Yeah.
So I guess in this analogy, he thinks, he's having this conversation with Davide, which is, I mean, it's ridiculous to even compare these two people. But Davide's on the second tier, he's on the third tier, and he characterizes Davide's objection about anomaly cancellation, which is a very good one, by saying that it's as though Davide is staring at a 3 by 3 grid of a chessboard and trying to predict the next move, but he doesn't know there could be a queen over here or a rook over here. So Eric thinks that there's so much other stuff going on in his theory that you can't possibly object with a reasonable comment about anomaly cancellation because there's so much other stuff that's going
Yeah.
to fix it.
He cannot engage with the criticism. He will always deflect to some obtuse analogy that could be spewed in any context. No matter what the criticism is, he could just vomit up this chess analogy or the whale analogy or whatever, and it's just a way of obfuscating. He cannot engage with this, with the very real substance of the criticism. That's it.
Yes, that's right. And the analogy is, like most of his analogies, just completely inappropriate. I think a better analogy for what his theory is not, a 3 by 3 piece of a chessboard where you're trying to predict the next move, but it's like a 3 by 3 grid of a chessboard where there's 2 rooks in the same square. One of the pieces is a checker piece instead of a chess piece.
Yeah.
And, there's a pawn on the back rank that hasn't been promoted. Just none of
Yeah.
it makes any sense.
Some
So
yeah.
just a very, very weird dude. Yes, so that's his opinion,
That's
I guess.
narcissism for you.
Yeah, I think that's the only real explanation because at some point he got a little more emotional in the conversation and said, well, you know, people spend their entire lives doing physics in order to just improve some measurement by a little bit or calculate the next term in some series expansion. And you could have spent that time doing something else, like getting rich or starting a family. And you only should spend the time on physics if you really care about it and if it really motivates you. So I found this kind of weird because it seems like he actually somehow does care about the science, or at least he's claiming to. He thinks that the standard model is beautiful. He really wants to understand reality according to him, but he goes about it in this very circuitous way where he's, just claiming that he's a misunderstood genius who deserves a Nobel Prize and being completely unwilling to explain
And his
in
brother
any.
and his wife too, right? 3 in the family apparently are well deserved.
Yeah, I mean,
But also hypocritical, right? He's talking about you have to, being dedicated to physics instead of wanting to make money. Meanwhile, his entire professional career has been centered around making money. I mean, he's has an enormous net worth thanks to Peter Teal, and that's it. He's the money guy, right?
Yeah,
That's why
that's
he
right.
was there.
That's my suspicion. I mean, it's difficult to understand why he gets invited to these places. So, I mean, as you know, he went to San Diego because Brian Keating is there, and for reasons that are completely mysterious to me, he seems sympathetic of geometric unity. I don't understand why any serious scientist would invite him to give talks at these places, but if I had to speculate, it would be either because they're hoping that he's going to donate money to them, obviously, or because they want access to Peter Thiel. Maybe through him they
Yeah,
think
well,
they.
Brian is trying to inflate his web presence, right? He's trying to be a barnacle on the Teal boat. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's possible that Eric maybe word got around that Eric does give money to any institution that kind of artificially inflates his credibility. So, right, I'm sure Perimeter probably did get money, or at least thought they were going to. So,
Yeah, that would be the guess, but I don't think, as far as I know, he has not actually given money to any of these places that he visited. So he also
oh,
visited my alma mater for my PhD, the University of Chicago, in 2021, I believe,
mhm.
shortly after I graduated. And I also don't really know what the story is with that visit, but to the best of my knowledge, he never gave any money to Chicago. I don't think he's going to give any money to Perimeter. So if that was the hope in inviting him, it seems like it was a sorely misplaced hope.
Swing and a miss, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a mess. Um, yeah, so this narcissism, I guess, came across very clearly. There was the more this emotional thing that I just mentioned. Um, yeah, I think trying to remember if there's anything else that's worth mentioning about this. Um, yeah, maybe that's the long and short of it.
hmm Well, I mean, I think we got a lot of meat there. It's definitely amusing. I think I got a kick out of it. I'm sure all the viewers have gotten a kick out of it. So, yeah, you were at the right place, the right time for him to be walking through. That was fun.
Yeah, it worked out. I mean, at the time, I was really hoping to avoid it, but in retrospect, I'm kind of amused that it happened just because it was the wildest conversation I think I've had in my life. So from
Yeah,
that perspective, it was fun. I mean,
probably not the last time you'll tell this story. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know. He describes GU as a work of entertainment, and at the very least, I found this conversation entertaining.
Well, that was quite the story, wasn't it? But we can't stop here. There are a lot of idiots out there who are still clinging to the ridiculous notion that Eric is a real physicist, that GU is a real theory, and that nobody has debunked anything. Not me, not Sean, not nobody. That's quite preposterous, since Sean did explain for the layperson how GU is absolutely nothing, and I've done the same with the help of Tim Wynn in a previous video, but maybe we can do a little better. Since we have Christian here with us, we're going to go through a broad assessment of GU and how it's not a legitimate theory, citing glaring issues that automatically disqualify it from being classified as such. Then we will zoom in a bit. During the Piers segment, Eric made a number of specific claims regarding GU, which we can use to make a little checklist, so that we can debunk those claims one by one. Let's start with the broad overview.
Okay, we're back with Christian, and we're going to do a little bit of an overview of GU here. So take it away, Christian.
Great, thanks a lot. So just to get everyone on the same page, some very basic statements that everyone probably knows. This is about this geometric unity, which is Eric's supposed theory of everything. It was introduced in this Oxford lecture and this quote-unquote working paper. Just to be clear, this is of little to no scientific interest. So if you're interested in seeing some of the problems with this in more detail, I recommend looking at this paper by Tim Nguyen and his anonymous co-author writing under the name Theopolia, and I think you've had him on to discuss some of these issues. Besides this, no one has really engaged with this at all. So you might ask, why am I wasting my time telling you about this? I think it's primarily just a sociological question because I became bizarrely fascinated with Eric's personality after this interaction at Perimeter. But I think it could also be fun just to run through some of the issues with GU as a sort of pedagogical jumping off point to tell you some of the things that we've learned about quantum field theory in the past decades. So I'll start by just saying, what is it? What is GU? What are the problems with it? And then we'll break down some of the claims that were made on this Piers Morgan debate with Sean Carroll.
Very good.
Great. Okay, so part one, what is this? This will be slightly technical, but I'll just try to big picture it for you. So GU claims to be something called a gauge theory. So these are theories in physics that are like the standard model of particle physics, like QED or QCD. And importantly, it lives in 14 dimensions. And I can explain why that is in more detail if you like. But the ingredients that Eric has in his theory are starting with our 4D spacetime. So we live in 3 spatial and 1 time dimension. That's fine. At each point of spacetime, he then considers all of the metrics. So metrics are objects that tell you how to measure lengths and distances, and they're the key player in Einstein's theory of relativity. And it turns out that in 4 dimensions, a metric has 10 independent numbers that specify it at a point. So those 10 plus these 4 give you 14. This is some bizarre numerology at this point, but this is how he gets his 14-dimensional space. Upstairs in this 14-dimensional space, he then says, let's introduce something called a gauge field. So this is like the photon in electromagnetism and its field strength F. All of this seems okay so far. He defines some unusual gauge transformations, which are not the ones we normally think about. These are so-called inhomogeneous and tilted gauge transformations, and he defines something called this augmented torsion, called T, which isn't super important. But what I do want to emphasize is then he says, okay, here is my equation. Here's the equation of motion for my theory. And it looks like this. So it has some of the players we've seen above, this F and this T, but also this mysterious ship in a bottle or Schiam operator, which has become infamous in all of the critiques of GU. So that's an important object. It appears in 2 places in this equation. And then he adds in some matter. So all of this is kind of the gauge sector, if you like. Then he adds in some matter, which are fermions like the electrons or quarks that we know and love. And these are objects that also couple to this gauge field in some way, which again involves this mysterious Sheab operator. And the main claim that Eric makes is that if you take these fermions from step 4, which live upstairs in Y14, somehow those fermions look like the standard model particles that we know and love when you view them from downstairs. That's the big claim, and it's something he repeats over and over in this Piers Morgan interview.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the big
What a
picture.
weird symbol to use for the Sheab operator, by the way. It's like a target, as though he doesn't actually have it and he's still hunting for it. That's
Yeah,
very
it's actually, I don't know what this, I actually had to make in LaTeX this symbol by myself. It's not a standard symbol. So he clearly went out of his way to use this. I don't know
yeah.
why,
Which
but
is fine. You can make up a symbol, but just like what's up with that one?
yeah, it looks very weird. He does a lot of these weird things in the paper, like this chimeric bundle and the zorometric. He likes to invent a lot of strange words.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I don't know. Okay, so this is roughly what he wants to do. So let's now see why this is immediately nonsense. So there's two ways in which you can critique a theory like this. You can make mathematical critiques or you can make physical critiques. I'll start with the math ones, which again are nicely explained in the paper by Tim. So there's a technical statement which, as a mathematician, he should be aware of, I think. Eric should know that if you're going to talk about spinors, which he uses to get his matter that he claims look like the standard model, you need to check something, which is called the vanishing of this second Stiefel-Whitney class. And the symbol is this. So this is very technical, but it's just to point out that there's a basic thing you need to do, which he does not do and does not even comment on, doesn't seem aware of. A second mathematical issue is I think he's slightly confused because he keeps talking about defining his spinors, his matter in 14 dimensions without a metric. You can't do this. You need a metric in order to define spinor fields. And he seems to confuse defining metrics on different spaces. So at some point he says, okay, we have a metric on this other space C, and we can use that to define spinors on Y, but it's just wrong. It's just a basic confusion. And third, and perhaps most fatally, as you know, this ship in a bottle operator, I actually didn't realize because I read his paper first and then went back and read the Oxford or watched the Oxford lecture. In the paper, Eric basically just says he doesn't know how to define it and doesn't really make any claims. But in the Oxford lecture, he says something which is supposed to be a definition of this thing, which Tim rightly points out is just wrong. There's this technical complexification step that you need to do, and it's just incorrect. So I think if I had to guess, he probably saw the paper by Tim and Theo and changed what he was saying before putting out his paper, since his paper appeared after theirs. He
Right.
probably realized, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
these guys are right. I made a mistake, and just said, okay, now I don't know how to define it. So this is, any one of these is kind of embarrassing / killer. Like, if you want to say, well, he's not a physicist, he's a mathematician, any mathematician should know that you need to be rigorous and prove all of these claims. So any of these is already fatal for a piece of mathematics. That's just math. So you can ask, what about the physics? It claims to be a theory of everything. If we're extremely charitable and say, okay, suppose you can fix all of those issues, you can mathematically define this GU. It's already dead on arrival for some other physical reasons. First of all, this is supposed to be some unification, right? GU is supposed to unify the various physical theories that we know, like the Einstein equations and the Yang-Mills equations. There is no mechanism by which GU can actually reduce to those. So it's not unifying anything. It's just a sort of kitchen sink where he throws in all of these bizarre ingredients, and it doesn't really reproduce any of the physics that we know. That's already kind of, I think, a reason to immediately dismiss this. And then there's some other also fatal issues, even if you say, maybe this is not a theory of everything, but it's an interesting physical theory to study. You could say that. You would be wrong. Since, first of all, if you try to define the Sheab operator in the way that Tim describes, by doing this complexification, there's something called a gauge anomaly. We already mentioned before that if you have an anomaly in your theory, it's completely fatal. There's a separate issue that if you do this complexification, it leads to something called a loss of unitarity, which you can think of as conservation of probability, right? Probability must be one that something will happen. And if your theory loses unitarity, you have a probability of 1 that something will happen at a particular time, and then you wait, and later there's a probability of 2, which doesn't make any sense. That's just killer, right? And then there's some other facts that we've learned in studying physics in the past, decades. I think a lot of the progress in theoretical physics has been asking about consistency. So if a theory is consistent, what else must be true? And there's various theorems that go under the name of Weinberg-Witten and Coleman-Mandula and various theorems that we've learned. One of them is that if your theory has something called a spin 3/2 field, which Eric's theory does, he says, look, I have this so-called Rorita-Schwinger field, which is spin 3/2. For the theory to be consistent under pretty mild assumptions, it has to be a theory of what's called supergravity. This is essentially non-negotiable. It's not advice. It's a fact. It's a theorem. And you can just show that there is no such consistent theory of supergravity in 14 dimensions. It stops at 11. It's just not there. There's no such thing. Maybe you try to evade this and say, well, somehow secretly you don't need supergravity or gravity at all. It's just a quantum field theory. It's not a gravitational theory. But then there's just another fact, another theorem that we know, that there are no unitary local Lorentz invariant interacting quantum field theories above 6 dimensions. So these are some mild assumptions like conservation of probability, basic sanity checks you would expect any theory to have, and you can just show that there aren't any above 6. So in particular, there's none in 14. It's just dead. So I think in short, this is why no serious theorist has paid any attention to this theory, because it flies in the face of so much that we know. There's just so many theorems, so many consistency checks that this thing fails that there's no reason to ever think about it. You should just write it off immediately, which is what all of my colleagues do.
I know that got a little esoteric in certain spots, but that's what happens when debunking frauds who cloak themselves in jargon. There are moments where it can be made exceedingly clear even to the layperson how they are full of shit, and there are moments where it gets murky because their web of buzzwords has to be dismantled systematically from the inside out. But I do think we did both of these things quite successfully. In case my previous content shredding GU to pieces wasn't convincing enough, this ought to have done the trick. A refusal to define key terms, inconsistencies, and incompatibilities, calling GU an incoherent mess would be an understatement. Now let's get a little more specific with certain things that Sean and Eric said on Piers Morgan. There are 4 relevant statements, and I'll let Christian take you through them, refreshing your memory with the appropriate clip when necessary.
Okay, so Eric talked a big game on Piers Morgan, made a lot of very specific claims. Let's tackle those. Take it away, Christian.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think I really enjoyed Dave's video on this, and the whole debate was just very entertaining to watch. Sean, how dare you? But I just want to run through some of the statements that were made, since I've seen, I think, some rather bad faith arguments being made online about, did Sean lie about something? Did he misrepresent what's in the paper? So let's just be very, very clear about what is and is not in this geometric unity paper. So let's go through it. So the first one, I put the timestamps. All of these refer to the Piers video. So Sean objects, as I did. He says, where is the Lagrangian? Where are the interactions? Is the proton stable? Is there dark matter? And then says, Eric's paper has none of that.
Where's the Lagrangian? Where's the interactions? Is the proton stable? Is there dark matter? Like, how does it fit into what I already know?
Those were
And
all
Eric's
different
theory,
levels of the stack, Sean.
Eric's paper has none of that.
And Eric responds, I think, mostly to the first point. So he says, what you said about Lagrangians is false. He says, Sean says he hasn't looked at it, blah, blah, blah. And he claims he can say why there should be dark matter.
That he hasn't looked at it and hasn't read it. That's why he says that there are no Lagrangians in it. What you said about Lagrangians is false. What you said about predictions is false. Why Sean chooses to misportray the fact that I can say why there should be dark matter, what the dark energy is.
So these are the only claims I could find from Eric that respond to this objection from Sean. Okay, so let's address the first one. Is there actually any Lagrangian in this paper? Now, technically, if we're being extremely generous, there is a section 9 of the paper, and below equation 9.4, he writes in very obtuse notation what he claims to be the Lagrangian for geometric unity. So there is a formula there that you can point to. But this is kind of fake. So I think merely mentioning, oh, here is a Lagrangian in the paper, but not actually defining all of the ingredients. Crucially, this Lagrangian involves the Chiab operator, which we've mentioned, which has not been defined. So you can write this formula, but if pieces are not defined, I don't think this qualifies as a Lagrangian because no physicist can use this, can do calculations, can make predictions because the pieces are just not there. So even though you can maybe point to this and say, okay, well, Sean says there's no Lagrangian, I think more precisely what Sean probably meant is there is no usable, well-defined Lagrangian in the paper, which is absolutely true.
It's like you could call it an algebraic equation, but if it uses wingdings instead of well-defined variables, is it really an algebraic equation? Right? It doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't think it qualifies. And I'll make one other point, which is that, as we said in the first part, there's really two pieces to this geometric unity. There's this so-called gauge sector and then the matter. The matter is what he's really excited about because he thinks it looks like the standard model. This is a Lagrangian for the first part, just this gauge sector. He never writes a Lagrangian for this matter sector, which I think for him is somehow the more important piece. And he just sort of says, I've quoted this here, he just claims that these bosonic and fermionic variations of the spinorial Lagrangian can be combined, blah, blah, blah. So he essentially just asserts that it all works, which he does over and over. It's just an assertion. So I think it's fair to say that Sean's criticism is essentially correct. There's no usable Lagrangian, and what he claims to be the Lagrangian is only for part of the theory and not all of it. So yeah, I think if we're keeping score, I think Sean wins this point. Okay. The other things that he said, just to quickly respond to these, Sean mentioned interactions, stability of the proton, and dark matter. And all of these, I think, are, again, not in the paper in any substantive way, but there are some words he can point to. And I think this is what the Eric supporters are doing online. So people can point to this particular part of the paper where he claims that the interactions work out. So the quote is, the various subfields of omega accommodate misspelled the functionings of the CKM matrix, blah, 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 blah. So this is just the claim that all of the interactions work, but he doesn't show it. There's no quantitative discussion. It's just a nothing burger. There's nothing there. So this, I think, is fair to say is not in the paper. I looked for proton stability, since he seems to claim all of what Sean said is in there. There is only one mention of proton decay anywhere in the paper, and it's not even about his theory. He says, oh, there's this other grand unification proposal, this George I. Glashow SU5 model. He says, proton decay happens in that model, but my model is not that. So maybe the proton is stable in my theory. But of course, this is just a logical category error, right? I mean, if something happens in another theory and your theory is not that, it does not follow that the proton is stable in your theory. It's just nonsense. And the dark matter comment, well, okay, there's a brief mention in the sense that Eric says, look, my theory has all of these particles, and there's a massive list of the particles he claims are there. And then he essentially says, maybe some of these particles are the dark matter. But this is, again, just some sort of weird gesturing in the direction of something physicists care about. He's like, maybe this is dark matter. Yeah, it's, there's nothing quantitative. I mean, as Sean says, show me a plot, compute a relic abundance. I mean, there's nothing. So
make a quantitative prediction, do something, yeah.
Yeah, do something real. So, I mean, my perspective as a physicist is that essentially there's no substantive content about any of these topics in the paper. So Sean is essentially correct. None of it's in there. And if you point to these throwaway comments in the paper and say, no, look, Sean lied, they are in the paper, it's highly misleading because none of them really say anything. It's just words that are thrown in, essentially that he points to post hoc and says, no, look, it was in the paper after all, which is, it's just highly misleading. Good. Okay. This one I think is easy. So Sean's other objection is to ask, has the theory been shown to be viable in a very basic way? Is it stable? Is it free of anomalies, which we've mentioned? Is it finite? And says none of that is there.
Is it stable? Is it free of anomalies? Is it finite in the sense of the quantum mechanical calculation that I already mentioned? Again, none of that is there.
So I've watched the entire debate a couple of times now, and as far as I could tell, Eric does not respond to this point ever. So he does not rebut this in the Piers video. It's not mentioned in the paper. any of the other public conversations that I've listened to do not mention this, any of these viability checks. So I think this is essentially a win by default since he doesn't say anything. But just to comment, any viability check that you could do on geometric unity either automatically fails or has not been performed. So again, to come back to anomaly cancellation, this has not been checked. And if you try to define the Shiab operator via complexification, it automatically fails. And this, I think, is something which was already raised to him in Oxford in 2013. So I'll tell you an anecdote. One of my colleagues who shall remain nameless, who was in the room at this Oxford lecture, claims that in the question session after Eric's talk, which was not recorded, someone asked him, have you checked very basic things about your theory, like do the anomalies cancel? And reportedly, Eric's answer to this question was, what is an anomaly? Which does not inspire confidence, right? So yes, this is this is a fail, a loss for GU. We've mentioned unitarity, this conservation of probability. It fails if you try to do this complexification. It seems to require supersymmetry, as we've mentioned, and we know that that's impossible in 14 dimensions to have a theory of supergravity. And finally, it's claimed but not shown that this GU somehow reproduces all of the theories that we know, and that would be a necessary viability check, which is not performed, and I claim cannot be performed because there's no mechanism for it to do this. And I'll just inject a little bit of self-serving defensive string theory here a little bit. I think some people, when they think about GU and other theories of everything, like Kirchheim-Mungel, who has an iceberg on this GU and also an iceberg on string theory, I think some people kind of do this both sidesing, where they say, well, okay, GU and string theory have some similar ingredients. Both of them have extra dimensions. Eric's theory is in 14 dimensions and superstring theory is in 10. And they kind of conflate these two things and say, well, both of these have similar problems, so are they somehow on similar footing? Mm-hmm. But this is, of course, ridiculous, right? I mean, the reason why we care about string theory is because of these viability checks, that it passes all of these checks that geometric unity fails, like anomaly
cancellation. Make up some crap and just say it has 17 dimensions. That doesn't make it worth anything.
Yeah, you don't get to just do numerology and pick whatever dimension you like. I mean, the 10 dimensions of string theory are required for anomaly cancellation. It's a consistency condition rather than something invented. So I'll just inject that small comment and then move on. Okay, so then there's this word vomit that Eric responds to this third objection from Sean, which is asking, are there new predictions? Does your theory solve any interesting problems? And he says, I see none of that.
Are there any new predictions? And finally, does your theory solve any interesting problems that we already thought we had? And again, I see none of that in Eric's paper.
And this is one of the kind of famous, most rewatched parts of the video where Eric, just launches and says, Sean, I'd like to hear your explanation for blah, blah, blah. And he claims he can give you an explanation for all of these things. Why the gauge group of the standard model is this, why there are 3 generations, this, the quantum numbers, the Higgs sector, the Yukawas, the blah, 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 blah.
I can give you an explanation for why SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, why there are 3 generations, why 16 particles in a generation, why the observed quantum numbers are the way they are, why the Higgs sector comes out of seemingly nowhere with a quartic potential, with a quadratic term, why the Yukawa coupling is just there, just so in order to produce mass when the weak force forbids a mass directly in the Dirac operator.
So is this true? Is this in the paper? And again, it's gestured to in the paper, but wildly overstated. First of all, you don't even really need to take this claim seriously since we've already demonstrated GU is ill-defined. So anything that comes after that, you can kind of ignore. None of it can be trusted anyway. But suppose we're being super, super generous and steelman this GU construction. Suppose those problems can be fixed. What does he actually do? Does he explain all of this stuff? And I would say no. Essentially what he does is begin with some model in 14 dimensions that has a huge amount of stuff. And he picks out particular pieces of that stuff that if you squint and are very, very generous, kind of vaguely look like some parts of the standard model, and then just wildly claim that those pieces somehow give rise to a theory that looks like our world with the standard model in 4 dimensions. And this is also not explained. So again, if we're evaluating this claim critically, is there really an explanation or prediction, as Eric claims? I would say no. It's essentially numerology. I mean, the reason why this 128 appears is because 2 to the power of 14 divided by 2 is 2 to the 7, which is 128. There's some weird numerical coincidences, and then he somehow gets some matter, and because of this numerology and a bunch of wishful thinking, he says, look, I get the standard model. It's wrong.
Sounds very Terrence Howard-y.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. It reminds me of these weird, I don't know, numerological things where people look at the book of Genesis and they say, okay, if you count the numbers of all of these things, it somehow predicts, I don't know, the end of the world. That's the intellectual equivalent of what Eric is doing. Okay, last thing, and I'll go into just a little bit of detail here because I haven't heard others discuss this. So Sean objects correctly that there's no quantum mechanics in the paper, and no attempt at showing that it solves any problems of quantum gravity.
There is no quantum mechanics in the paper. There's no attempt at showing that this solves any of the known problems of quantum gravity.
And I couldn't find a place where Eric directly responds to this criticism, but around this timestamp, he launches into this word vomit, which I'll reproduce on the next slide, about something called geometric quantization, which is different from geometric unity. This is an actual thing that serious people do. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But if you're trying to defend Eric, you might say, well, okay, elsewhere he has spoken about the children of Einstein and the children of Bohr, and you don't need to quantize the geometry, but geometrize the quantum. So maybe he doesn't want to quantize his theory and doesn't want it to be compatible with quantum mechanics. But I think you can immediately reject that, since the paper itself directly says that the theory on this 14-dimensional space Y should be quantum. So he talks about how the fields on Y are more readily quantized, and he talks about different sections that would pull back quantized values on Y. So taken at face value, I think he does want the theory to be quantum, and it's not. Okay, so then what is this timestamp referring to? What does he say there? So I'll just flash this here. I've seen people who were reacting to the debate point out this particular word salad as an example of very bad science communication, which is true. It's horrible. He just says a lot of jargon about every phase space carrying a symplectic form can be treated locally as a blah, 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 blah.
That we blew Hamiltonian analysis, and that in fact every phase space carrying a symplectic form can be treated locally as if that symplectic form is the curvature of a line bundle, and the L2 sections of that line bundle form a Hilbert space, and the P and Q coordinate functions can be promoted to operators.
It is very dense jargon, but it's also just wrong. And I want to emphasize this. What he's referring to is something called this geometric quantization, and this Hilbert space that he talks about is not the actual Hilbert space of the quantum theory that he wants. There's some technical thing called a pre-quantization, and he either doesn't understand this or is intentionally conflating the actual Hilbert space of the quantum theory that he wants with this pre-quantum Hilbert space that is just not the same. So all you need to take away from that is that this kind of throwaway comment about geometric quantization doesn't save him. It's just misrepresented. It's just wrong. So I would say that on this fourth point, again, Sean is correct. There's no quantum mechanics in the paper. We've explained why GU cannot be made compatible with quantum mechanics, and for that reason, it's essentially just dead on arrival. That's it.
Yeah. How do you have a theory of everything that does not incorporate the already massively successful aspects of physics? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's quantum field theory is the most successful theory of physics that we have. You can test things to 8 decimal places in colliders, and his theory has none of that. It makes no contact.
Yeah.
So I'll just wrap up here. As an executive summary, if you're not an expert and you just want to know what happened in this debate and what is GU, I would say, again, if we're being very nice, he is a mathematician. There are some correct mathematical statements in this GU paper, and there are even maybe some ideas, these weird inhomogeneous gauge transformations he defines. I wouldn't call them good ideas, but there are things I haven't seen anywhere else. if we're being nice, that is something you could point to, but it's just not coherent. It's not coherent enough to merit any serious intellectual discussion. And in this Piers debate, Sean rightly criticizes this content. His objections maybe could have been stated more precisely. He says there's no Lagrangians when maybe he means there's no usable or well-defined Lagrangian, but I think all of them are valid. They're all correct in essence. And as you know, the Eric responses are essentially ad hominems, criticisms of academia, and these just completely oversold claims which are not credible. So in one line, I mean, you can't really, I think, point to a winner of a debate all of the time because it gets a bit messy. But insofar as you can, the winner is clear. Sean wins, he is correct, and Eric is wrong.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, to state the obvious, GU, Eric has used his modest competence in advanced mathematics to manufacture something that can be sold as convincingly revolutionary to lay people, and has tried to hide from academia as long as possible to evade this precise sort of direct and thorough criticism, to extend that window as long as possible where he can enrapture the public with this cosplaying as a genius sort of a thing before the eventual blowback of people who actually know what they're talking about, going in very, very rigorously and specifically explaining how all of it is complete bullshit. So, yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's the experience of reading the GU paper as someone who thinks about these questions of theoretical physics every day. It's in a weird sort of uncanny valley, like when you see these AI generated images that have 6 fingers and things like that, where it's kind of like, okay, some of this makes sense and it's almost looks like physics or math, but then there's just so much weird, bizarre, wrong stuff that it sits in this kind of weird intermediate place. So it feels almost like, I don't know, having a stroke or an acid trip or something to read this paper. So I don't recommend anyone to it.
And obviously, and it explains why he's gone 3, 4, 5 years or however long with nobody in academia even looking at it or talking about it, because why would they? Right. And so he's taken advantage of that window of time to proselytize and act as this genius that is being ignored by the establishment, when everyone in the establishment is like, why would you want us to look at this? You put it out on April Fool's. You admitted it's a work of entertainment. Like, it's not serious work, right? It's, Sean said, dog ate my homework type of a thing. And he's absolutely right. And now the blowback is finally hitting him, and it's he's flipping out about it. So,
yeah, that's right. No, I just want to emphasize what you just said to echo a little bit. It is not the case that anyone is suppressing these ideas or saying, okay, this guy is an outsider, so you shouldn't consider it. I mean, we as the physics community are ignoring him precisely because it should be ignored and there's nothing there. And I just want to be super clear about that.
Yeah. Last question. I mean, I've made several videos on Eric now, and my viewers know in great detail my perspective on who Eric is, why he does what he does, the connection with Peter Teal. Do you have any differing opinions or additional perspective? Why is Eric the way he is? Why does he do what he do? What does Peter Teal want? Why is he paying Eric to do this? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's really not clear to me. I mean, it could be something like what you're saying, where for some reason these guys want to inject some sort of skepticism about science in the public. I don't really know to what end, what that would actually achieve. So it's possible that there's some nefarious ulterior motive going on. But my best guess is that there's nothing like that, and it's really just one of these misplaced genius complexes where he's honestly doing this because he thinks it's right, and he actually deep down wants to understand the universe, and he's just going about it in the wrong way. I mean, that would be my guess, but it's hard to know.
That's remarkably charitable of you. Don't
maybe too nice.
If that were true, he would have been pursuing physics all this time and tried to become more of a legitimate scholar instead of, and it doesn't even have to be done in a particular institution, but he would be doing that instead of doing money stuff with Peter Teal. To me, Teal's agenda is crystal clear, but I want to leave it open, the possibility that I can also fixate on a narrative and then go down a rabbit hole. And, if somebody has some alternate perspective, but yeah, from where I stand, it's pretty obvious what Teal is doing in trying to undermine the credibility of legitimate sources of information, because if you can get somebody to ignore every scientist and every university and every legitimate institution, then you have a monopoly on their worldview, and then you have a monopoly on their voting behavior, and you have a monopoly on the masses and the behavior of the masses, essentially. So you can steer their consumer behavior, you can steer, as I said, their voting habits and everything. So that's what I think is going on. And Eric, I will agree with you, maybe due to some of this interaction, like it does sound like he has deluded himself into thinking that he is the genius that he portrays himself to be. So he's a little bit of like it's half greed and half, him buying his own sauce a little bit. But yeah, then that just makes him part pawn to Teal, essentially.
Yeah, it could be right. I mean, if your explanation is right, then these people who invite Eric to come give talks hoping to get access or money are obviously not going to get any of that, since that's not the point.
Well, hopefully word gets out and they stop doing it.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I don't understand it, but it's very interesting. No, I like your explanation. You might be right.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I've taken a shine to Eric as of late, and because I do think that this particular propaganda is very insidious, and so yeah, this has added another layer to the saga. Thank you for this perspective. It was a fun story, and definitely diving into GU even a little more. I think people enjoyed it in the first video I made on them. So this is just more for everybody to enjoy. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hopefully it should now be abundantly clear that beyond GU being a joke, Sean did indeed know exactly what he was talking about in explaining how nobody should take Eric seriously, whether the dog truly ate his homework or not. Anyone who still thinks that geometric unity is a real theory simply isn't paying attention. They're delusional people who want to believe that they're smart enough to understand frontier theoretical physics without ever having studied any physics whatsoever, so they prop up a fake genius who gives them that feeling through their lofty rhetoric and agenda-driven attacks on the academic institutions that remind them of their intellectual inferiority. But enough people have gotten the memo by now that Eric's fans are very much the minority, so maybe they'll shrink to zero in the near future. Maybe I'll get more physicists to dunk on GU even more thoroughly at a later date. Who knows? But for now, most people can see what a joke Eric is, and precisely how his agenda fuels this bullshit rhetoric. But what's that agenda again? Peter Teal something something? Well, let's take a look at this video from 4 months ago that has 2 million views. You're in a war and you don't even know it. Oh, we know, Eric. We know. We've intercepted communications from General Teal and we know exactly what your orders are. That's why you're getting ambushed like this. Anyway, this talk is brought to you via the brand spanking new organization, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, the brainchild of Jordan Peterson, which claims to focus on traditional Western values. You know, like colonialism, racism, sexism, and genocide. And, I don't know, fast cars or something? It's only 15 minutes long, so we can certainly skim through for some highlights to wrap things up.
I want to begin with going back to the Bible. I am your DEI speaker. As an atheist Jew progressive from the United States, I'm sort of slightly askew. But what I want to do is I want to go back to the Bible and Isaiah, which is at the end of Bob Dylan's famous All Along the Watchtower. And if you go to the King James Version, where it says, "Go and set a watchman, and let him declare what he seeth," it is two riders that are approaching, as the song says. And what did they come with? They come with news of the fall of Babylon.
Has everyone's eyes already rolled out of their sockets? Eric needs everyone to know how well-read he is, and that he knows how to rock and roll. He's a polymath, remember? This helps sell the genius brand. Let's see if he can muster up an actual point.
We are in a situation in which the post-World War II order has fallen. And J.D. Vance has announced this. I personally think it's very important that the U.S. treat its friends in Europe very, very well, and it should be done in a fashion that lets people know that the U.S. will be there for the long haul. I am sure that that is in the cards, but we have to realize that we are waking up from a very long period of time, which I've called the Great Nap.
Name drop for Peter Thiel's hand-picked VP J.D. Vance, some preemptive ball-licking for oligarch Elon Musk, and some crap about waking up as a way to baselessly disparage existing institutions. This jackass doesn't even hide his motives anymore.
I want to talk about a very difficult subject, and that is that the concept of actual physical emasculation has a rich history going well into the 20th century and, in fact, into the 21st century. One of the reasons that we've been deranged by the trans discussion is that the trans discussion is about devitalization. And it is a recurrent theme that authoritarian regimes attack the reproductive rights of their citizens.
Who let supersize Ben Shapiro in here? Fucking hell, can any of these jerks go without bringing up trans people for even 5 minutes? Trans people existing is devitalization. Trans people existing is a communist authoritarian plot to attack reproductive rights. Jesus Christ, when will these morons find a new scapegoat?
Or Sanjay Gandhi, who triggered, in part, the reaction in India. Do we have Indians in the audience? Very disappointing. I would say to them, Sampurna Kranti ab narahai bhavi ityas hamara hai. Total revolution is now the slogan. That is how angry people were and how violent they became because of sterilization camps that were practiced in the 1970s.
Dear Lord, it's so painful. I appreciate the shot of the audience so we can see everyone staring in bewilderment as they wonder what the fuck this American asshole is rambling about. But wait, he speaks Hindi. Polymath, right?
And I have this quote from Elon Musk. Because I think what you have to assume is that when you go to war, one of the great terrors is that you will be disfigured. The sun also rises is a famous example. Bouncing Bettys were discussed in Vietnam. And the fact is that these people very much came for our children. This is not cute, it's not funny, it's a terrible tragedy, and I don't think that I overspeak when I call it a reproductive holocaust.
I don't know what pisses me off more, Eric pretending that trans people existing is a reproductive holocaust, name-dropping Elon Musk for the bazillionth time, or hearing him say is every 20 seconds. Eric, how the fuck does trans people existing stop anybody from having babies? Try making an ounce of sense at any point in your ridiculous life.
The reason that this talk changed radically at 4 a.m. is that I became aware yesterday that many of you don't know the basic terminology or framework of what you have just been through. You think you have been through the culture wars, which is some sort of cute internet conflict that seems really draining, exhausting. No, this is actually something that has recently been termed hybrid war. It's a 2007 concept from Frank Hoffman, and it says that in the current situation, non-shooting wars have no border and no end.
Yeah, Eric totally changed his entire talk at 4 a.m. that day. It isn't just a regurgitation of the same dogshit propaganda he's been spewing on podcasts for 5 years now. And the reason is because you Europeans have to know about this no-border culture war. The trans are coming for your kids, and the communists are coming for your freedoms. Let me show you the way.
Cyber attacks, diplomacy, psychological attacks, information warfare. This has been discussed in the national security community, but it has not been discussed widely, which is why when we have coffee and I use these words, I see blank stares. It's important that we learn their terminology.
Their terminology or your terminology? Eric is a lieutenant in the information wars. He is employed by General Peter Teal to infect people's minds with a virus that will cause them to distrust any and all sources of legitimate information. Scientists, universities, federal agencies, you name it. He projects his nefarious agenda onto others as a way of infiltrating the guard of the target. It's like a creepy, rapey guy telling a group of women at a party about some fabricated, creepy, rapey shit some other random guy did as a way of manufacturing trust so that he can take advantage of them later. It shouldn't work at all, but it kinda does.
Human terrain system. This is the concept that we can weaponize the social sciences. Cultural anthropologists, economists, psychologists can be used. We are the terrain. It is no longer the mountains of Afghanistan or the Hindu Kush that we have to map, but we have to map the actual aspects of human nature by clicks and how long you stay on a site, what you care about, what's your behavior on Pornhub. We are available as the terrain for these national security people who do not show their faces. They fight over us. And they use our social sciences and our universities to fight us as if we are simply terrain.
Who but Eric Weinstein can sound like a smug douche just by saying Afghanistan? But yes, of course, the universities and the social sciences are the devil. They do the trans-woke communism stuff, so they're bad, so we can't listen to them about anything. Not vaccines, or climate science, or any of the other sciencey stuff. McCarthyism is back, baby.
Amazingly, many of you do not know about the whole of society approach. Whole of society approach is an innovation that came out of the Asia Pacific Security Center named after Daniel Inouye in the Pacific. And it basically says that the institutions of a society must be aligned to fight hybrid wars in the modern era. Now, if you think about that, you will realize that that is a very complicated name for soft fascism. Literally, the fascia is what binds together these institutions. And if you've ever tried to say, well, if I don't go to the New York Times, can I go to the Washington Post? Can I go to the Times of London, the BBC, NPR? All of these people appear to be in lockstep.
Wow, news outlets sometimes all say the same thing. I wonder if that might be because they're all just talking about a thing that objectively happened. Look, it's not like propaganda doesn't exist, and it can run deep, but if Zionism has taught us anything, it's that even the most powerful people in the world can't unify every single media outlet, since many of the ones that have traditionally run Zionist propaganda have periodically flipped over the past year and a half to expose Israeli atrocities, since it's the only way they can retain any sense of journalistic integrity. The entire media landscape will never be 100% lockstep. Ever. But this rhetoric isn't just a fabrication, it's a clarion call. All media is bad, so reject all media and trust me alone. Worship me like a prophet beyond reproach. I expose the corruption and tell the truth at all times. This is Eric's playbook.
This is coordinated through the whole of society approach. Because they have chosen the name for it, we will call them hoes. Now, let's talk about these hoes. Are they truly the whole of society? That's what they would have us believe. But somehow, many of us didn't get the message, many of us didn't get the call, and none of you got the terminology. So what are we if we are not part of society? I would put to you that we are the benighted rest of society. ARC represents the bros, benighted rest of society, fighting Klaus and Davos and the World Economic Forum, who at least know that there's a war when we do not. That gives them a certain advantage.
Oh, Eric, you're so cheeky. Did you think of this hoes versus bros quip at 4 a.m., or did you workshop it in some red-pilled incel message board? A few dorks in the audience seem to like it, so well done, I guess.
Right now, we treat Europe as if it is a quaint Disneyland, when it is in fact the most dangerous place on Earth. And the great trade hypothesis is that most all of Western vitality was traded for one commodity, and a precious one at that. And you have to honor these people. You have to give the devil its due. They did keep us out of thermonuclear war since November of 1952. The trade ended in January of 2025. You can decide that this is a good price to pay or a bad price to pay, but you cannot claim that the trade is continuing. We are back to vitality, and I'm sorry to say that almost certainly we will soon be back to kinetic war. The great nap is now over. So, what does this have to do with building?
Eric really has created his own unique brand of dickhead, fear-mongering about nuclear weapons, right into red pill wake up from the Matrix rhetoric, right into a Jimi Hendrix reference. It's just as seamless as it is nauseating. You can't have a rebel without the rock and roll, and Eric's a rebel to the core. Don't let the blazer and net worth fool you. He's fighting the man just like all you poor people. What can we do, Eric? What's the solution?
The two figures, the Joker and the thief, are crucified on each side of Christ. Now the Joker says there's got to be some way out of this. Right now, where we are is 4 light years from the nearest star.
Yeah, he's revving up his interstellar engine. This is his way of appearing like a prescient sage leading us into the future while shamelessly gargling Elon Musk's balls. Okay, Eric, tell us about the timeshares available on planet Teal.
The problem is that the culmination of all human theory about the base reality stagnated abruptly and mysteriously in 1973. Imagine that physics stopped when Crocodile Rock was top of the charts.
I was wondering when we were going to get some physics is dead bullshit. Eric never disappoints. And he throws a bonus music reference in there. Crocodile Rock. He's on fire. Okay, Eric, I'm sure that someone in this audience hasn't heard this bullshit before. Let her rip.
The youngest living Nobel laureate in theory, in theoretical physics theory. That number is always below the age of 50, until this magical point where string theory enters the game as a theory of quantum gravity. And our youngest living Nobel laureate is now over the age of 70 because the field is not producing new results. This is also terrible, but it turns wonderful because if we can find the problem, we can make progress and reach the stars.
String theory is a stupid jerkface, but now that we know the problem, we can murder all the dumb string theorists and finally go to space. Grab your pitchforks, guys. Hey, Eric, do you remember what Sean told you about the prevalence of string theorists?
In my department at Johns Hopkins, we have 6 professors in the theoretical physics group. One of them does string theory, and even he only does it sort of half-time. I wish we had more, honestly. This is very typical. Even at the most stringy departments, it's maybe half.
It's beyond trivial to derail this bullshit tirade against string theory by simply pointing out that most theoretical physicists aren't working on string theory. I don't know who's in this audience, but I doubt there are very many physicists, so spin that web, King.
They took a couple of theories, they cocooned them, string theory being preeminent among them, and they said all competitor theories will die, and in the field of physics, it's called the only game in town. You try to do something else, your career comes to an abrupt end.
No physicist can do anything but string theory, except for the thousands of physicists who publish on not string theory every single day. Can we just skip this part?
Quantum gravity is the holy grail. All the questions center on what is the theory of quantum gravity. Quantum gravity is the holy grail of theoretical physics. You perseverate. And if you say something enough times, it becomes as if true. But if it was the Holy Grail, why is there no mention of it in the corpus of English language books before 1972, right before physics stagnated?
Well, Eric, people have been discussing the concept of quantum gravity since the 1930s, when quantum field theories became a topic of serious discourse. That discourse takes place in primary scientific literature, not books. Once we made some progress with quantum field theories, finding success with QED and QCD, we moved up the ladder and tackled gravity in a more rigorous way. String theory came about, then loop quantum gravity, and others. With something concrete to talk about, that's when those concepts showed up in books for laypeople. What a profoundly idiotic thing for you to be confused about. But more importantly, physics didn't stagnate in the 1970s and has never stagnated since. This is just the bullshit script that people like you and Sabina peddle in an attempt to assert yourself over a vibrant scientific community that rejects you.
It is because there is no theory of quantum gravity in the way that they're looking for it. Quantum gravity is safe. You can invite your Iranian and your North Korean and your Russian and your Chinese students to do quantum gravity, and nobody's going to get hurt.
Oh, wow. Quantum gravity is actually a plot to trick the greatest minds within the axis of evil into wasting their lives on a wild goose chase. It's brilliant. How does he come up with this soft-serve swirl of science denial and dogshit political takes? And of course, Eric knows there is no such thing as quantum gravity because he's smarter than every physicist alive. Eric knows so much about physics that he doesn't even have to be a physicist or publish any physics ever in order to be smarter than real physicists. He and Elon are halfway to Proxima Centauri already, looking back on all those dipshit Nobel Prize winning naysayers wasting their time with silly theories.
We have to go beyond Einstein because we are simply not capable of getting to the stars if we have a speed limit set at c. Western science must lead the way. Vivek Ramaswamy is convinced that somehow China and India are pulling ahead of the West. This is not true. The greatest threat comes from France.
Is it France or is it the White House? Don't get me wrong, Vivek is super smart and not a piece of shit at all, but I'm pretty sure that the orange clown cutting billions of dollars in funding to every single area of science is the real threat to progress here. But sure, let's whine about Einstein and the speed of light. Eric, I actually have some good news. The government has wormhole technology. Have you met Ashton Forbes? He knows all about it, and according to him, he's even smarter than you.
I have nothing against Eric Weinstein, but he's not even remotely close. Geometric unity is not even remotely close. He's never going to solve anything. No disrespect to him. He has no clue what he's talking about. No clue what he's talking about. I'm beyond Eric Weinstein at this point. Way beyond him.
Maybe you two should get together so we can finally colonize other planets. Just a thought.
Are we prepared to take on Paris and Marseille? I put this to you. Oh. Can I go back? Apparently you cannot.
You can go back, Eric. You can go back to the hole where you came from and never speak publicly ever again, since you are quite literally pointless. But I won't put my money on that happening anytime soon.
What I want to say is the following. We Jews have a meal that isn't really a meal, it's a survival manual. And it's the Passover Seder. And I ask you this year to find, if you're not Jewish yourself, find a Jew and get invited to a Passover Seder. It describes how we survive. And the way we do it is that at some points you have to realize that you cannot stay here and you must leave even if you feel that there is no way out. You may feel that you are backed against the Red Sea. But if you do not actually realize what time it is, you will surely perish.
Yes, Passover is totally a survival manual. How to survive a thing that didn't happen. Since you're such a scholar of the Torah, Eric, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Exodus is a myth. It didn't happen. Jews were never slaves in Egypt. They never had their backs against the Red Sea. So if you want to keep your academic persecution narrative multidimensional, you'd better switch over to the Holocaust, since that's actual history.
I believe that the end of physics is almost in sight. It may bring us wonders. It may bring us the ability to traverse the cosmos. This could be the greatest time. We have a brief period of vitality before the wars will surely start if we choose to revitalize. We must use it well, and our greatest challenges are ahead, but I think we're going to make it, and I think that the future will be amongst the stars and be glorious indeed. Thank you all very much.
A pompous final remark, some forced light applause with a single woo, probably from Jordan Peterson, and a quick cutaway before it rapidly dies down to plug some shit book about restoring our foundations. These panicky oligarchs are nothing if not fragile and desperate, don't you think? I didn't intend for this video to get political. I was just trying to make fun of Eric some more. But that's the thing. You can't combat these propaganda peddlers without getting political, because their rhetoric ultimately seeks to manipulate the politics of the masses. That's what Eric is. He's a lieutenant in the culture wars, seeking to infect the minds of the masses and polarize them against real knowledge and the places where that knowledge comes from. That's why he needs so much pomp and circumstance. The promise of a future in the stars, fear-mongering about trans people, the underdog rock and roll attitude while looking like he owns the yacht club. It's all so transparent that it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that it actually works on some people. But what can we do in retaliation? We mock. We take the wind out of his sails, and by extension, Papa Teal's. We show as many people as possible the reality of the matter, that Eric is a pointless blowhard posturing as the wisest person alive for money. He's pretty good at it, I'll give him that, but once you see through the facade, all that's left is laughter. So that's it for Eric Weinstein today. As you can tell, he's become one of my very favorite punching bags just because of how relentlessly insufferable he is and damaging to boot. What other misadventures will Eric find himself in? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Until next time.